Some moments don't simply pass through your life. They stay. They settle into your bones, your breath, your memory, so deeply that years later, your body remembers them before your mind does. The tightness in your chest, the heat rising to your face, the way a room full of people can suddenly make you feel completely alone. This is one of those moments. And it happened on a stage where I believed I was finally allowed to exist. I was 9 years old the night they told me to leave the stage. 9 years old, standing under lights so bright they blurred the faces in front of me, gripping a microphone that felt heavier than it should have. My hands were small. My voice was not. The concert hall was beautiful, the kind of place people dressed up for. Chandeliers hung like frozen stars above velvet seats. The air smelled like perfume and polished wood. Everything about that night whispered importance. I had practiced for weeks. Every evening after homework, I stood in our tiny living room while my grandmother sat on the couch, hands folded, eyes closed, listening as if my voice was a prayer. When I finished, she always smiled the same way. "You don't sing to impress people," she told me. "You sing because your voice deserves to be heard." I believed her. That night, she braided my hair slowly, carefully, like each strand mattered. She pressed my dress smooth with her palms. It was simple, white and clean, not expensive, but chosen with love. Before we left, she knelt in front of me, held my face in her hands, and said something I didn't understand fully until much later. "You belong anywhere your feet take you." I walked into that concert hall believing her with my whole heart. The event was advertised as a community showcase. Talent, unity, opportunity. That's what the flyer promised. I was the youngest performer on the list. Most of the others were teenagers, confident, loud, surrounded by parents holding phones and pride. I stayed close to the wall backstage, humming my song under my breath, trying to calm my shaking knees. When my name was called, the room grew quiet, too quiet. I stepped onto the stage carefully, like the floor might disappear if I moved too fast. The spotlight hit my face, warm and blinding. I squinted, then lifted my chin the way my grandmother taught me. I adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and I sang. At first, everything felt right. My voice didn't shake. The words came naturally. The melody filled the space exactly the way it always did in my bedroom. I saw heads lift. I saw people lean forward. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her chest. Someone smiled at me, not politely, but genuinely. For the first time in my life, I felt like the room was listening, like I mattered. Then I heard a voice that did not belong in my song. "Stop!" One word, sharp, cold. Final, the music cut off mid-note. My breath caught in my throat. At the edge of the stage stood a white man in a dark suit, a headset hanging around his neck like a badge of authority. His face was tight with irritation, as if I were an inconvenience he hadn't planned for. I didn't know who he was yet, only that his presence made my stomach drop. I'm sorry," I said quietly, thinking I'd made a mistake. "Did I do something wrong?" He stepped closer, not rushing, not shouting, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "You weren't scheduled for this slot," he said. I swallowed. "Yes, sir," I replied softly. "They told me to go after the piano." He cut me off with a raised hand. "This isn't appropriate," he said, scanning the audience. "We need to keep things organized." Organized. The word felt like a wall. "I practiced," I whispered. "I won't take long." A ripple of discomfort moved through the hall. People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed, no one spoke. The man sighed, clearly annoyed now. "This isn't the time," he said. "You need to leave the stage." "Leave the stage?" I stared at him, confused. "But I was invited," I said, my voice barely holding together. He leaned closer, his smile thin, his tone falsely gentle. "Sweetheart," he said, "this event has a certain standard." That word, sweetheart, burned more than anger ever could. My face grew hot, my ears rang. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, no longer admiring, no longer listening, just watching. Waiting, judging, I lowered the microphone slowly. My hands were shaking now. The lights above me stayed bright, unforgiving, as if determined to expose every inch of my humiliation. I turned to leave the stage, and that was when I heard it. Not applause, not laughter. Movement. A chair scraping against the floor, then another, then another. I stopped mid-step, because the audience wasn't sitting anymore. People were standing, one by one, row by row, rising together, and I didn't know yet why. But I knew in my 9-year-old heart that something had shifted. And nothing, not the stage, not the lights, not the man who tried to silence me, would ever feel the same again. If this moment has already reached you, stay with me. Because what happened next changed my life forever. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. I stood frozen at the edge of the stage, one foot already turned toward the exit, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. Then the sound came again. A chair scraping back, then another, then another. At first, I thought people were leaving, walking out in discomfort, embarrassed for me, unwilling to witness a child being humiliated in public. But when I looked up, they weren't leaving. They were standing. Slowly. Deliberately, together, a man in the front row rose first. He placed his hands on the armrests, pushed himself up, and remained standing, eyes fixed on the stage. Then a woman beside him stood. Then an entire row followed. The sound rippled through the hall, fabric shifting, shoes pressing into the floor, breath catching. The organizer turned sharply, confusion flashing across his face. "What's going on?" he muttered. I didn't understand either. I was still holding the microphone, my fingers numb, my mind stuck somewhere between shame and disbelief. Someone in the audience spoke. "Let her sing." The voice was calm. Firm, another voice followed. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Then another. "She deserves to finish." The room, which moments earlier had felt like a trap, now felt alive, charged with something I had never felt before. Support. The organizer's face tightened. "This is inappropriate," he snapped, turning toward the audience. "This is a structured program." But his voice no longer carried authority. It carried fear. A woman near the aisle shook her head. "You invited her. She belongs here." The man in the suit looked back at me, irritation hardening into something sharper. "Step off the stage," he said again, louder this time. My throat burned. I wanted to obey. Not because I agreed, but because I was tired of standing in the spotlight with my heart exposed. Because I was 9, because adults were supposed to know better. I lowered my eyes, and then I felt something unexpected. Applause, soft at first, then louder. Clapping, not polite, not rehearsed, but raw and defiant. My head snapped up. People were clapping for me, for the little black girl they had almost watched be erased. The sound filled the hall, echoing off the walls, growing stronger with every second. My chest tightened. Tears blurred my vision. I had never been applauded like that in my life. The organizer raised his hands. "Enough!" he shouted. But his voice was swallowed by the noise. That was when I saw her, my grandmother. She stood near the back of the hall, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other raised high, clapping with a strength I didn't know she had. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, not the gentle smile she wore at home, but something fierce. Proud, protective, unbreakable, our eyes met. She nodded once. "Sing." I lifted the microphone again. My hands were still shaking, but something had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. The pianist looked at me, eyes wide, waiting. I nodded. The music began. And this time, when I sang, my voice didn't just carry melody. It carried truth. Every note came from the place inside me where fear had been sitting moments earlier. I sang louder, stronger, braver. The sound filled the hall, wrapped around the audience, reached places I didn't even know existed. People cried openly now. Some closed their eyes, some held hands. The organizer stood stiff at the edge of the stage, powerless, invisible. For those few minutes, the stage belonged to me. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. People stood, cheered, some shouted my name. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed. I had come on that stage as a child hoping to be heard. I left it as something else entirely. But I didn't know yet that this moment, this beautiful, defiant moment, was only the beginning. Because backstage, while I hugged my grandmother and tried to catch my breath, decisions were being made. Calls were being placed. Stories were being rewritten. And the man who had tried to silence me was about to discover that power only works when people agree to stay quiet. If your heart is racing right now, stay with me. After the applause faded and the lights dimmed, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. Because humiliation doesn't always end when the clapping starts. Sometimes. It waits for you backstage. My grandmother wrapped her arms around me the moment I stepped off the stage. Her body was shaking, but her voice was steady. "You did good," she whispered. "You did more than good." I buried my face in her coat and finally let myself cry. Not quiet tears, the kind that come when fear and relief collide. The kind that leave you exhausted afterward. People passed us, patting my shoulder, offering soft smiles and kind words. But not everyone looked at me with warmth. I felt eyes on us, sharp, calculating. I looked up and saw the organizer standing near the curtain, speaking into his headset with clenched teeth. His jaw was tight, his face flushed, his posture rigid, not defeated but angry. I didn't understand it then, but that anger wasn't about the disruption. It was about control. We were asked to wait in a small side room while the program continued. A woman in a black blazer smiled too tightly and handed me a bottle of water. "Just sit here for a moment," she said. "We'll sort everything out." Sort everything out. The phrase felt heavy. My grandmother sat beside me, her hand never leaving mine. I swung my legs nervously, listening to muffled music from the stage. Minutes passed, then a knock. Two men entered, both white, both older, both wearing the kind of expressions adults wear when they've already decided the outcome. The organizer stood behind them. "This performance was not approved," one of the men said calmly. "We'll need to speak with your guardian." My grandmother stood slowly. "She's right here," she said, "and she was invited." The organizer crossed his arms. "There was a misunderstanding," he said. "This event has sponsors, expectations." Expectations, that word again. What expectations? My grandmother asked. For a child to be silent? The men shifted uncomfortably. This has become complicated, one of them replied. I felt my chest tighten. Complicated always means someone else pays the price. They asked us to leave the building quietly. Not because I had done something wrong, but because they didn't want attention. They didn't want the story spreading beyond the walls of that hall. But the story was already alive. Phones were out, videos had been recorded, and people were talking. Outside, the night air felt colder than before. A woman approached us, her eyes still red from crying. I recorded everything, she said softly. In case you need it. Another man handed my grandmother a card. I work with a community arts foundation, he said. Call me. More people gathered, strangers standing with us, protecting us. I had never experienced that kind of solidarity before. It felt strange and powerful. Later that night at home, my grandmother sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone silently. Her face grew more serious with every swipe. What is it? I asked. She turned the screen toward me. The video. My video? The moment the organizer told me to leave. The moment the crowd stood. It had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in faster than I could read. Let her sing. This is unacceptable. That man should be ashamed. I didn't understand everything I was reading, but I understood enough to know this wasn't over. The next morning, reporters began calling. By afternoon, the event organizers released a statement. It was short, carefully worded. They apologized for any discomfort caused and emphasized that the situation had been misunderstood. No mention of my name, no mention of responsibility, just distance. That's when my grandmother said something I'll never forget. They're not sorry, she said calmly. They're scared. A week later, a letter arrived. Official, thick paper. The concert organization had suspended the event organizer pending review. Pending, not fired, not accountable, just paused. My grandmother folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. This isn't justice, she said. It's a test. I didn't know what she meant yet, but I would soon. Because behind closed doors, people were digging. And what they uncovered about that night, about that stage, about that man was bigger than me, much bigger. The truth never arrives all at once. It leaks. It slips through cracks people forgot to seal. And when it finally reaches the light, it doesn't whisper. It demands to be heard. For days after the video went viral, my grandmother kept the television on low volume in the living room. News anchors talked about controversy. Commentators debated protocol. Strangers argued about what was appropriate for a child to feel on a stage meant for adults. But no one asked me how it felt. No one asked what it was like to be told, in front of hundreds of people, that I did not meet a standard. At least, not yet. Then the emails started. Not just to the concert hall, to the sponsors, to the City Arts Council, to the board members whose names were buried at the bottom of the organization's website. People wanted answers. And for the first time, those answers didn't stay locked behind polite statements and legal language. A woman named Rachel Moore came to our house one afternoon. She was a journalist, not the loud kind, not the kind who pushed microphones into faces. She sat at our kitchen table, folded her hands, and looked at me like I was a person, not a headline. "Can you tell me what you felt when he asked you to leave the stage?" she asked gently. I hesitated. My grandmother nodded, so I told the truth. I told her about the heat in my face, about how small I felt, about how confused I was because I had followed every rule I was given. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Do you know," she said, "that this isn't the first time he's done something like this?" The room went quiet. Her article came out 3 days later. It wasn't flashy, it was careful, and it was devastating. She revealed that the organizer, the same man who told me to leave the stage, had a long history of quiet removals. Children of color moved later in programs, performers labeled off-brand, talents dismissed under vague language like tone, fit, and standard, patterns documented. Ignored until now, the sponsors reacted fast, too fast. Statements were released. Funding was temporarily withdrawn. The board announced an independent investigation, and the organizer's name disappeared from the website overnight. I watched it all unfold from our couch, my legs tucked beneath me, still struggling to understand how one song had opened a door people had kept closed for years. One afternoon, my grandmother received a call. She put it on speaker. "This is the City Cultural Affairs office," the voice said. "We'd like to formally apologize." Apologize? The word sounded strange. They invited me to speak at a council meeting, at the same hall where I had been silenced. My stomach twisted. "I don't want her used," my grandmother said firmly. "You won't be," the voice replied. "This time she leads." The night of the meeting, the room felt different, less polished, more real. People filled the seats early. Cameras lined the walls. When my name was called, my heart raced, but I stood. I walked to the podium slowly. No spotlight, no music, just my voice. "I was told to leave a stage," I said, my hands steady now. "Not because I did something wrong, but because someone decided I didn't belong." The room held its breath. "I'm not here for an apology," I continued. "I'm here so the next kid doesn't have to feel what I felt." Silence, then applause, not explosive, not performative, respectful, earned. After the meeting, a woman approached me. She knelt to my height. "You were brave," she said. "You changed something tonight." I didn't know then how true that was, because 2 days later the investigation concluded, and the man who told me to leave the stage was officially removed. Not suspended, removed. But justice doesn't end with consequences. It ends with transformation. And that transformation was just beginning. After the organizer was removed, people expected the story to end. They wanted a clean conclusion, a headline, a villain punished and a lesson learned. But real change doesn't work that way. It doesn't arrive loudly. It grows slowly in places no one is looking. Life returned to something close to normal. I went back to school. I did my homework. I sang in my room again, just like before, except now my voice felt different, stronger, like it knew something I didn't yet have words for. Sometimes kids whispered when I walked into class. Sometimes teachers smiled at me with a little too much pride. I didn't like that part. I didn't want to be special. I just wanted to be free. One afternoon, a large envelope arrived in the mail, no return address. My grandmother opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check. The letter was short. "Your courage gave me mine. I quit my position today. I stayed quiet too long. No name, just truth." My grandmother folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where she kept important things: birth certificates, old photographs, memories that mattered. "This," she said, "is impact." Weeks later, I was invited to sing again, not at a concert hall, not under chandeliers, but at a small community center where folding chairs replaced velvet seats and the lights buzzed softly overhead. This time, the stage was barely a foot off the ground. This time, no one decided whether I belonged. When I sang, people didn't stand because they were shocked. They stood because they felt seen. Afterward, a woman approached us holding her daughter's hand. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. "She loves to sing," the woman said quietly, "but she's afraid." The little girl looked at me with wide eyes. "Were you scared?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said honestly, "but I sang anyway." She smiled. And in that smile, I saw the real ending forming not around me, but around her. The city announced a new program that spring, a youth performance initiative, not controlled by donors, not filtered by standards, but led by educators and families. They asked if I wanted to be the face of it. My grandmother answered before I could. "She'll be part of it," she said, "but she won't carry it alone." And she was right. This story was never meant to be carried by one child. One evening, as I practiced at the piano, I asked my grandmother something that had been sitting in my chest for a long time. "Why do you think they tried to stop me?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Because when someone like you speaks, it makes lies uncomfortable." I thought about that, about stages, about silence, about power. I realized then that the man who tried to send me away never really saw me, but thousands of others did, and they stood. That mattered more than anything he could have taken. Still, one piece of the story remained unfinished. Because some truths don't come from the crowd, they come from the person who caused the harm. Some endings don't arrive with applause, they arrive softly, in an envelope, in a sentence, in a truth you didn't know you were still waiting for. It came months later. A letter, plain, no logo, no return address. My grandmother handed it to me without saying a word. "This one is for you," she said. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many conversations had changed the direction of my life, and carefully opened it. The handwriting was uneven, like someone who had rewritten the words too many times before finally letting them stay. "I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I deserve to be heard. But I owe you the truth." My chest tightened. I already knew who it was from. He wrote about the night at the concert hall. About how he had panicked not because of me, but because he was afraid of losing control, afraid of donors, afraid of breaking the image he had spent years protecting. He admitted something he had never said publicly. When you stood there, singing without permission, without fear, it reminded me of everything I had learned to suppress. I chose order over humanity. And I was wrong. I read the letter twice, then a third time. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel victory. What I felt was something quieter, relief, not because he apologized, but because he finally saw me as human. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "I've stepped away from public work. I'm volunteering now, quietly, without a title. This isn't redemption, it's responsibility. I won't ask for forgiveness. I just needed you to know that you changed me." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't frame it. I didn't keep it close. I let it go. Because forgiveness, I learned, isn't something you give to free someone else. It's something you give yourself so you can move forward without weight. Years passed. I grew. My voice deepened. My understanding widened. I sang on many stages after that, some large, some small, some barely stages at all. But every time I stepped into the light, I remembered the night someone tried to send me away, and the crowd that stood instead. One evening, after a performance at a youth showcase, a little black girl approached me backstage. She held a microphone in both hands like it was sacred. "They told me I might be too young," she said softly. "But I sang anyway." I smiled. "You always sing anyway," I told her. "That's how stories survive, not through headlines, not through punishment, but through courage passed quietly from one voice to another. I was once a child told to leave the stage. Now I make sure stages stay open." And if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. When one voice is silenced, it's never just about that voice. And when a crowd stands up for one child, they stand up for the future. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own voice, if it made you believe, even a little, in collective courage, like this video, subscribe to our channel, share this story with someone who needs it. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Thank you for listening till the end.